So thank you for the invitation. Some of this data have been already presented, so I've reviewed what we already published and put some new data that have been generated recently. So I will briefly outline the state of the art and see the data we have regarding breed, field fertility of the stallions, methods of preparation of the sperm, batch variation, and some special cases that we find during the work. And a way where there is a possibility to give a client an idea or a colleague an idea whether a stallion that cannot produce by conventional means can be used successfully in the program. So there are several reasons why a client would require this type of work. Originally, the therapy of infertility, like it had happened in humans, where an infertile couple goes to the clinic, and so both male and female contribute equally to this problem, and therefore also there is one reason to use this for infertile semen. On the top of that, now there is an interest, as has been done in cattle, for example, to speed the breeding of some line, and so people are starting to breed young mare, or don't wait that the sport activities career is terminated. They want to breed early because generation interval is working against improvement. There are also commercial factors like the fact that expensive semen or semen available in limited quantity, ICSI can be an option, because from a so the fact that you can freeze the embryo gives you more flexibility in terms of using your own recipients, for instance, or also to plan the next breeding season by preparing the embryo outside the breeding season, like you do with the stallion when you freeze the semen during out of the breeding season. And so when the season starts, you already have in the tank some embryos with different combinations you might want, so the outcome will be more. And also, last, it's the fact that now realizing that instead of selling foals, instead of selling pregnant mares, they can sell the frozen embryos in a straw, right? Actually, it's done in cows, so it's nothing new, but it's for the equine industry. Briefly, the technique is quite straightforward, and it comprises several steps. One in green can be done in clinics. It's the clinical part. The other done into a specialized laboratory. So you collect the mare with, as Robert described. The eggs are then brought to the laboratory where they undergo maturation. Then those that reach the metaphase 2 with the body are injected. Then they are cultured 7-8 days to get to the blastocyst stage, which can be frozen or transferred. In fact, we work with, I would say 99% of those are frozen and shipped around frozen. Also because most of the activity is between September, October until March, April. So you don't have many recipients available. And a retrospective analysis of our activity has been published recently on the Equine Veterinary Journal. This I will go over quickly because you all already seen that. We, as a threshold, we decide to pick up a mare when there are at least 5 or 6 follicles which are equal or larger than 1 centimeter. Sometimes this is not happening, and so we, anyway, after 3 weeks with improvement. Vaginally, the animal we use an epidural anesthesia, which is quite frequent to operate, especially if you're doing mares with a lot of follicles, which requires a lot of time, and big ovaries that also for the veterinarian doing the transrectal work, it's becoming very tiring. In any case, we aspirate all follicles that are at least half a centimeter and above. These are the eggs that are collected after searching the flush of the follicles. At this stage, they can be either shipped to loaded into a cryovials and shipped at 20-24 degrees in an insulated box, which are delivered within 24 hours, or if collected locally, if we collect ourselves the mares, then they can go same day into maturation. Maturation is done with the MEMF12 media with serum replacement and gonadotrophin, usually 26 to 30 hours the timing required. And now we're coming to the sperm. There are several ways of preparing sperm. The most used are density gradient separation and or swim up. Swim up requires more semen, or let's say the other way. With density gradient, you are more efficient in recovering a high percentage of the motile sperm in it. So, especially because now we work with a very small amount of semen, we, as a default, use density gradient throughout the work. I think it's more consistent and gives more reliable recoveries and more predictable outcome. Although also swim up can be used. Like, quantity of semen is not a limiting factor. We'll go check the piezo with a blunt pipette. The piezo, it's basically a vibrating, it's giving a vibration to the glass pipette holding the sperm, and this penetrates more smoothly the oocytes, and we believe it's more effective in giving stress to the oocyte. Here you see how it is done. So the sperm, you need always live sperm, and which is immobilized prior to injection, and then is injected. So there are some requirements of the sperm. If you have a really dead, completely dead semen, or you cannot find a really, at least a more slightly moving sperm, you're not going to get any cleavage or any embryo development. So this we need to find at least a few viable sperm. After ICSI, the embryo is cultured in modified soft media for up to day 6. On day 6, it's partially replaced with the MEMF12 to facilitate the blastocyst formation. And then once the embryo reaches this stage, fully packed with cells, early blastocysts beginning to expand, they are frozen we use a slow freezing protocol in 10% glycerol. Or they can be also transferred, and we prefer to transfer on, as Dr. Foss mentioned, on day 4 or day 5, and considering that I think one of the reasons is that being frozen, they need the time to recover after the thawing process. There is no difference whether the oocytes are shipped, providing they are kept at the right temperature, whether they are collected locally. If you look at this data published in the paper I just mentioned, within the one collected locally in our laboratory, we get about 20% reaching blastocyst stage. On the shipped one, it's about 18%, so no difference. You see a small difference in number of embryo per OPU session. Here we are talking about warm blood mares, so they are more productive. from the shipped oocytes per session is lower, but this is because some clinics are still in the learning phase. And as Bob mentioned, the more eggs you get, the more embryo you're likely to get. Therefore, the recovery rate and also recovering as many follicles as possible is going to affect the outcome of the procedure. Another variable is breed, and this, of course, will affect both male and female side. Our retrospective data again, last 3 years. If we look at the warm blood, we have per session about 1.7 freezable blastocyst with warm blood, but with Arabians, it's half that part. And again, eggs are poor, but also semen is not as effective in providing blastocysts. And this it's also reflected on the percentage of blastocysts obtained. Now, if we look, there's been, especially by our colleague in Utrecht, they've been analyzing all the data that has been generated in over the years. But one point I would make before we start looking at the data of Stallion is that we talk about Stallions, but in fact probably it's more appropriate to talk about the fertility of the batch of semen. We work 100% with frozen semen, and therefore not necessarily reflect the fertility of the Stallion, especially because it could be frozen in different timing of the lifetime of the animal, in different places, so there are storage places, mishandling. So there are a lot of factors that are not under control, and we cannot predict, every time the outcome, but we can more say, so per batch of semen, the results is reproducible, but for the Stallion, it could be variable, although not as great variability as found with the female side, but there is some peculiarity. So this is an old study, but designed on purpose, so not on a clinical study. We use slaughterhouse ovaries, so it's more homogeneous population. Trying to reduce the female side variation. And if you look at these 4 category of Stallions, Stallion Group A, 5 Stallion with a pregnancy rate in vivo, so in the field, very good. Second B, second line, it's a Stallion group of Stallion that would not produce any pregnancy, but the motility was reasonable. C, again, lower pregnancy rate when used for artificial insemination. And then D is the one that basically no motile sperm could be found for ICSI. And if you look at the first 3 categories, they're basically no different. So with ICSI, does not reflect it does not correlate with the field fertility directly because you probably bypass many of the constraint that a sperm makes when he has to inseminate an egg in vivo, fertilize an egg in vivo. If we look at the clinical data and we look at extremes in this data set that we published several years ago, we took the extremes, so 5 very fertile Stallion, and the high end, and 5 at the low end. And here you can see that with a significant number of oocytes, these were done on opiomares, but pulled together so that there is a real number, high number, and you begin to see a difference. So in fact, we can say that there is some intrinsic factors that affect the quality of the semen. Now, whether this has to do with the batch of semen or whether it's to do with the intrinsic fertility of the stallion is difficult to determine under this condition. You really need randomized control trials with the same semen. When you work commercially, you get batch of semen from the same stallion from different sources, different handling, and therefore this is a factor that is difficult to control. These are some data of one Ho Choi, where also look at stallion with different fertility, and in fact, one of the stallion, the semen was refrozen, and they also described, although there are small numbers, they are clearly a component due to the stallion, or better to the semen, as I said, to the type of semen used that affect the outcome of the blastocyst production. It has become now popular, especially from very few stallion in high demand, which are dead, to use the semen, and there is a lot of speculation also around this. But this is one example of refrozen semen. So this case, we didn't do it, but we received the straws. They were diluted. So the original straw was diluted 200 times. So we work with these diluted straws, and you can see that, well, the sample is very, very diluted, as you can imagine. And in this experiment, where we injected slaughterhouse oocytes, we look at 2 straws of the same batch. We injected, so there was motile sperm to be selected, few. So in this case, when you use a refrozen straw, you cannot cut the straw in several pieces for several use. You have to use the entire straw. So this is must be explained to the client, because he can buy a straw for ICSI and he pays a lot of money, which is not really the value that you would get if you have an original straw. Stallion, and is the case in other stallions that we looked at. You can get some embryos. You see, from 10 eggs, we had 1 embryo each, and but the cleavage, it's affected. So most of the eggs do not cleave, and but those that cleave do make it to an embryo. And if you compare this data with the fertile, the same semen but original, so not refrozen, you can see that there is quite a decrease using refrozen. So if you're working with a mare, available mare, and you're really wasting a lot of oocytes, you can get an embryo, but you need 3 times more eggs to get the same number of embryos you would get if you use a semen and that is not refrozen. Another possibility would be for some semen production center, but we haven't been able yet to have these samples, is to freeze right from the beginning more diluted straw for ICSI. This could be another option, but again, you know, the stallion, they become famous after a certain number of years, so it's not clear whether this is a worthy procedure for those who are producing the frozen semen. This is a study by our colleagues in Utrecht with the embryos that we produce from oocytes that were shipped, and it's a data set of 16 stallions that were used at least 4 times for ICSI. And so on the top of it, it's the number of ICSI session used. So they go from 4 up to 77. And this is a percentage of embryos produced. And you can see most of the stallion would be in the normal range between 15 and then 25% of chances of producing embryos. So, but there are stallions that do underperform, and this one with 14 ICSI session, you know, very few embryos produced. So I would say that the majority of the embryo of the stallion, or at least of the batch of semen that we get, it's it's reliable, so it's not the major reason for variation. But I will show you some potential factors affecting this. We discussed at the beginning whether you do preparation with swim up or density gradient, and here we compared the same stallion, 3 stallions, where some of the ICSI were done with density gradient or swim up. So this first stallion DS, no difference. Second stallion, density gradient, swim up, marginally different, not really statistically strong significance. And the third one, CO, no difference. So this is why the reason why we actually preferring to use density gradient, because you can even cut 1/10 of a straw and still be able to work many mares in the same day. If you use swim up, the recovery rate of will be much less and less controllable. This also on data from our colleagues in Texas, Wan Choi, and where also they compared swim up and washing, density gradient and washing, and density gradient plus swim up, which I think is too much. But I mean, there is really no conclusive evidence that there are differences significant if semen quantity is not really limiting, or semen value is not really a limiting factor. One of the problems is batch variation that we find in some of the stallion. So if you look at this stallion HB, we had 3 batch over the years, and 2 the batch did not perform the effect affecting this outcome. And also quite striking was this other stallion. The first batch, the last one, C, actually we never been able to produce an end of this. It was frozen clearly in a different place because the straw had a different color, different center. Small number, but not because we stopped using it. So after 5 failures, then you begin different mares. You begin to think that there might be a problem there, and in fact, if you change batch, then you might you clearly show that you have different outcomes. So this is also now what has to do with the batch could be the preparation, but could be also the age of the stallion, because this batch they had different years. Although the C batch was actually frozen earlier in the life of the stallion compared to A and B. So this is unknown reason why it didn't work, but in fact that's the reality we are facing sometimes with clients. There are also special cases. This taken from a publication of Wan Choi, and where they look at semen that was found defrosted because they ran out of liquid nitrogen, and clearly they also use artificial activation after ICSI, but although they induced cleavage, no embryos were formed. So if the semen it's liquid nitrogen failure tank, then there is no point in using it as the outcome. It's zero. We had one, but only one case where we had a fertile stallion which did not perform in our laboratory. It did not perform in ICSI, as you can see here. if we use a control, we have our normal blastocyst, but with this ZB Stallion, several repeats and no embryo, and we could not answer. We didn't follow that up too much, but we stopped using it. Now, how can you assess the potential male factor effect? We compare in some of the stallions that were referred to us as being infertile, so they couldn't get pregnancy in the field. We did perform a comparison using Botupharma oocytes and clinical. Here there are three data: the production with ICSI, the production with the Botupharma oocytes, and the production with our control stallion, our benchmark. And as you can see, in this case of this PR stallion, probably this outcome was really due to the female factor and not to the male, because when we use a Botupharma oocytes, we got the same results as our control stallion. In this LC stallion, same finding. So it was the mares that were chosen to be mated with that probably were responsible for the failure, because when they was used for on the Botupharma oocytes, it did perform as well as our benchmark stallion. Another one instead, in this case, SH stallion, we can say that it did not perform well both on the clinical ICSI, but also on the Botupharma oocyte. So you can say here that really it's a problem with the stallion or that particular batch of semen. And the last one, again, is same. Probably it's a problem with the semen in the stallion and not with the oocyte. So to be able to address this problem, we also try to have a test which sometimes access big and time consuming. So we developed many years ago this pig oocyte maturation test, which is quite informative and can be used also for clinical purposes to assess the potential of any batch of semen. And in fact, we use, some of you might know that we are working also with rhinoceros, and we work with very poor quality semen. And this test, it's effective. So it stops 44 hours after ICSI, because the embryo will not develop, because they are interspecies, but it gives us a good information. We assess, pig oocyte is very homogeneous, very high quality and consistent, like a laboratory mouse, I would say, for this purpose. And so we go on to assess whether there is a pronuclear formation after ICSI, or they begin cleavage, as shown here, but then they will stop. But what we need is whether, as you remember from previous slides, the refrozen semen did stop at cleavage, so they did not cleave. So if we have cleavage, is already a very good indication. And these are also data published many years ago. And you can see when we use a stallion with high fertility and low fertility, there is a correlation with the percentage of normal fertilization, which means formation of two pronuclei. But also, if you allow them to cleave, there is also a good correlation with cleavage rate. And the low fertility, no motility sample, when you induce activation, you can rescue part of the potential by inducing cleavage. I'm almost to the last one slide, and if we compare also with the slaughterhouse, oocytes. Again, you see that high fertility and low fertility. If you look at the horse, when we use horse oocytes, we get, well, let's say 80% cleavage, and low fertility 55%. And the pig one, if we do the same batch of eggs, we get pretty similar results in terms of cleavage. Of course, there is no blastocyst in this case, but so I think this is an option to, if you have doubt of questions about a potential batch of semen, whether it's good or not. This is a very quick and easy test to do. To sum up this presentation, I would agree that I think most would agree that oocyte quality, so the female side, is a major determinant of the success of the assisted reproduction outcome. And ICSI will remain the major route to obtain vitro fertilization. For some reason, even with fertile semen, IVF in horse does not happen. And but even if this problem will be solved, I think ICSI will remain the major route for this purpose. Now, there are cases where ICSI, although not in the most of the cases, but in some cases can significantly affect the outcome of the procedure, and this could be Stallion related, but more likely batch of the semen related. So a problem could be solved by changing the batch of semen. We need motile spermatozoa to be able to have a high cleavage rate. If the spermatozoa are completely dead, even activation is not really effective. Breed, batch, method of preparation can all influence the success in the laboratory of embryo production. This male factor can be masked by female factor, or it can be an additional to it. And as I've shown, some tests can really be used to predict attention if it's going to be used for the production of embryos. So I will stop here. Thank you for the listening, and if you need more information, you can find on my website.